Reid. What began as a homicide investigation into the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe involved evolved into one of the most divisive and controversial cases that Massachusetts has ever seen. The public debated the evidence, the jury weighed the facts, and ultimately, after 2 trials, Karen Reid was acquitted of M. But now a new legal battle is underway, and this one may have consequences that reach far beyond a single defendant. Welcome to the Margaret McLean Show. I'm your host, Margaret McLean, your courtroom translator. I'm a former prosecutor and civil trial attorney, and I'm here to take you behind the scenes and explain the law. I also taught law at Boston College for years, so I like to teach. And hopefully you'll learn something on this channel if you haven't already. Now, press that subscribe button and the like button and turn those notifications on. I'd really appreciate that. So this week, Karen Reid, actually last Thursday, Karen Reid filed a sweeping lawsuit against the Massachusetts State Police and the Canton Police Department, alleging that the investigation into O'Keefe's death and how they investigated her was tainted by investigators whose private communications revealed racism, antisemitism, misogyny, and hostility toward entire groups of people. And those text messages were, I can't even tell you how bad they were, vile, disturbing, outrageous, to the point where I can't read any of them on this show. The Massachusetts State Police publicly condemned them and said that's why they fired Michael Proctor. And the Canton Police Department also allowed Sean Good, the other officer, to resign. Now, the question is whether those attitudes influenced the exercise of police power. Law enforcement officers make decisions every day that profoundly affect people's lives. They decide which leads to pursue, which witnesses to believe, which evidence deserves scrutiny, and which theories of a case move forward. Those decisions require judgment. They require discretion and, of course, the public's trust. That's why this lawsuit raises issues that extend well beyond Karen Reid. So think about it. What happens when investigators entrusted with enormous authority are revealed to hold deeply rooted prejudices? What responsibility do police departments have to identify those warning signs before they become public scandals? What did supervisors know in this case? What should they have known? And perhaps, I'd say most importantly, can the public maintain confidence in the justice system when allegations like these come to light? So tonight, I'm very lucky to be joined by attorney Morjieta Derisier, a seasoned lawyer who has been following this case closely. We'll discuss not only the legal claims in Karen Reid's lawsuit, but also the larger questions of accountability, institutional culture, public trust, and whether bias can affect the way investigations are conducted. So I'm going to bring Morjieta up here. And Morjieta, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. How are you, Margaret?
I'm great. Thank you for joining me. We've been guests together on NBC's, the Boston NBC's affiliate on Commonwealth Confidential. We discussed the Karen Reid trial last year, the Brian Walsh trial, and many others, and I'm sure we'll be on together again. We've got this great dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Morjieta, we can agree these texts that were revealed.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started, but yes.
I can't even, let's put it this way. I will be barred from YouTube forever and a day if I talked about them. But I was in fact, I think it was Thursday night, no, maybe Friday, I don't remember, but I actually felt I didn't get a good night's sleep because as somebody, as a former prosecutor, somebody that followed, I was, close with police officers. I have friends who are police officers. I just felt that the texts revealed in the civil lawsuit filed against the state police and Canton PD are so highly offensive, full of racial slurs, hatred, condemning just about every group from women to LGBTQ, praising Hitler.
Absolutely. I know. I mean, for me, I agree with you. I have family members who are in the Boston Police division. I have family members out of state as well. And I think for me, it really was the fluidity of the messages, right? It wasn't just a isolated incident or a small joke that was being cracked on the side. I mean, we only can see a snapshot of these messages that were just subpoenaed for this very brief amount of time. But can you imagine if we had in our disposal just years and years worth of these messages? I mean, you wouldn't be able to breathe. I mean, they're just so heavy to read on the eyes that I can only imagine what wasn't subpoenaed and what wasn't extracted from the phone, right? So it was
Oh,
hard. It is still
yeah,
hard. Even still thinking about it, it just kind of shocks the
I
conscience
know.
about it's the fluidity, it's the
Yeah,
audacity, right? That
it
was for
is.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, and Good and Proctor have been friends since high school, so I think this goes way back. And their biases, the way they felt about all different groups of people. Um, I remember this line though. The lawsuit alleged, I might not have it perfect, but an embedded culture of bigotry, misogyny, systemic failures, and institutional rot.
Yes, absolutely.
Rot.
Right.
And that's a serious allegation.
It is. It is.
How
But even
difficult.
more importantly, I think it's not
Yeah.
even so much that it's an allegation, it's
Yeah.
it's the culpability of not only just Proctor and Good, but think about all the other people that they're surrounded with, right? I think a lot of people have talked about whether or not their superiors, their friends, their colleagues really didn't know, right? Because you have these high ranking officials who have been in these positions for years, who made their way up to these positions. And they want us as the general public to believe that this all of a sudden just came to be, right? And we
Yeah.
have to eat that pill and just assume that this is new to light. But that goes back to the spirit of this complaint that was filed in Bristol County.
Oh,
This
yeah.
appears to be a culture, right? And this is not that it's just a culture, an acceptable culture, right? Because
That's what scares me.
clearly
Mm.
this is not something that just happened because of the Karen Reed case, right? It just so happened to be that the Karen Reed case or cases started to uncover and expose some of this culture. And I also want to be clear as well, and I've said this before, what's happening to Karen Reed is not unique to her. She is a voice for many people who have experienced similar issues in similar situations, in more egregious situations. And I think that people have to remember that these text messages, although there were some read, similar, not as bad, but some in
Uh,
her trial, they
yeah.
came from
There
attorney
were
Rosemary Scapaccio's investigation in her client's case. That's where these
yeah.
messages really kind of stem from. So just imagine what's going on in that case that led to the exposure of these text messages that now are being tied back to the Karen Reed case, right? So
Oh,
it's just
yeah. Can you imagine if they had all of these text messages for the trial last year?
I think we already had a very uh interesting trial. Like everyone was glued to the TV with that trial, but this
Mhm.
would have been the icing on the cake. I mean, I don't even know if the judge would allow some of these to be read. But
No.
yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that again, there's something about this culture that's being raised. Not that it didn't exist before, but how far back are we going to say that we didn't know? We couldn't have known. We're going to ignore, right? So, yeah.
I know. And speaking of that, let's talk a little bit of law because you sort of brought it up. The judge who will ultimately decide this case, that the civil case against the police departments, he or she is going to have to go through which of these texts is probative versus which are prejudicial. Because not all these texts are going to come in, because I think they may be so outrageous that they're going to be prejudicial. What do you think about that?
I agree. And I also kind of want to piggyback on that and say that we have two cases going on. We have the case in the court of law and we have the case in the court of public opinion,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And we cannot ignore the fact that Karen Reed and her team have strategically filed this in a way to gain garner from the court of public opinion while also starting their trail in the court of law, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's a double-edged sword, but I agree. Um, will all of these messages come in when there's a trier of fact? Probably not. But guess what? That's probably not what the avenue is. I would be shocked if this case went to trial. I mean, it it would
You're
just
right.
be it's
Yeah.
I mean, there's just certain things that you just kind of just let go away, quietly as best
Mm-hmm.
as you can. Um, but I agree, to answer your question, a lot of these messages won't come in, but I don't think that was the point. I think the point was bigger than that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
And
think the point was very well made. So,
absolutely. And I
yeah.
don't know if you had a chance, you were probably in court yourself trying a case, but I happened to listen to the motion today on whether Proctor's deposition in the wrongful death case could be delayed. And the word strategic came up quite a bit. So Proctor says, allegedly there's some medical condition that's under seal. We don't know what it is, but Proctor's didn't show up for his deposition today. They told him on Friday. Basically, Proctor's lawyer said, "Oh, my client can't show up for Monday," and poor Alan Jackson flied all the way out, even
Yep.
though he
Yep.
appeared on the New York talk shows. When was it? Friday. So he
Friday,
was kind
yes.
of already here. But
Yeah.
do you think that was strategic? That this lawsuit was filed, just a few days before his scheduled deposition?
I'll definitely say it's not ironic and say it's not a coincidence. I'll definitely say that for sure. But even Karen Reed herself said on the Today Show that this lawsuit was something that they planned to file all along. So
Of
I think
course.
right now we're on civil lawsuit 3 or 4. So I can't imagine that this is something that wasn't strategic, because clearly, there is this platform that has been created by Karen Reed and her team, and
Mhm.
everything that they do, and I would be surprised, but everything that they do, I would call very strategic. And I don't want to say that it's strategic. I also want to bring up something else that the judge mentioned in the hearing too, because I did have a chance eventually to listen to it, even though I was in court. But
Yeah.
something he mentioned too was that in civil litigation, it is very true that civil lawyers are supposed to be, for lack of better words, civil, right? There
Hmm.
really isn't supposed to be any surprises. Like, if you're going to depose me, you're not supposed to sneakily do it, or, plan your vacation when I'm going to come to you're supposed to be civil about it, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I do credit, Justice Gildia's position that, look, you knew you were going to depose this gentleman on Monday, and then a couple days before that deposition, you knew you were going to fly in to the East Coast, and then you filed this salacious grandeur complaint
Yes.
in Bristol County, and you didn't let his attorney know. I mean, he didn't have an opportunity or a right to. He absolutely doesn't have to say
No.
anything. But it was strategic,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you got to just take it for what it's worth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, Morgiana, I want to ask you. Do you think that the bias affects investigations? Like, do you think there's a disconnect between a police department's their policies and their booklets and their training, and the culture that exists among the members of the organization?
So, I don't have enough of my own personal information and data to say that, but I
Okay.
will say that in the last few years, we have seen a culture of the
Mhm.
investigation into the police tactics and procedures that they've used on cases across the board,
Yeah.
whether they're district court cases, superior court cases, assault and battery versus driving under the influence. A lot of that is becoming heavily under scrutiny. There
Oh,
are
yeah.
organizations currently studying statistics of police officers and the number of stops they do, the number of OUIs they have,
Mhm.
the towns, the location. So it is coming under scrutiny. And I think that this particular case, all it's doing is raising that level of, hey, not only should you be focusing on these statistics, focus also on the culture that fosters those statistics, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we're going to see a lot more scrutiny, not only just in like Canton and the Mass State Police, but all over towns and cities all over, where there have been questions about the procedures of police officers. Now, don't get me wrong, police officers walk into a very dangerous situation
Yeah.
every single day. They, have to entrust that the person that they're communicating and engaging with, doesn't have certain mental health disabilities, that they don't
Mhm.
have health issues. So they walk into crisis situations almost every single day. However, they're public servants, right? So they're
Mhm.
here for our behalf and our benefit, to protect and to serve us. So there is a little bit of, a level of understanding that the public should have to have too, right? So
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers personally to say
You
that, but
don't?
I will
I
I
thought
know,
you
right?
did,
I
Morjieta.
will say that we will definitely see more and more investigation, more and more
Yeah.
scrutiny, and more change, right? Because I think that's
Yeah.
really what this lawsuit is. As hard as it is to read, reading between the lines, we're looking at change. We're looking at policy change. We're looking at culture change. We're looking at change. And that should be for the greater good of everyone, right? It shouldn't
Right.
really be to embarrass anyone or whatever the case may be, but really to effectuate change for the greater good.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, change is starting to happen. I think since the Karen Reed case, the trial came about. I actually know someone, a young person who applied to be a police officer in one of the towns in Massachusetts, and he got in. He's very smart, bright, and so he gets in, but he's not covered by a union yet. I believe there's some sort of period where you're not. Well, he
Mhm.
made a really stupid joke that was kind of like against a gay person. He was fired on the spot.
Mm.
Boom. So
Oh, yeah.
yes, and but I thought to myself, well, the Karen Reed case must have made a difference in Massachusetts, because they didn't even, this kid didn't matter. He was fired. He can never be a police officer again
Wow.
because that's on his record.
Wow.
Yeah. So that does happen. And
And it should be, right? I think we
yeah.
should, everyone who holds, public office, or, public officials, or even you and I, even attorneys, we have a level
Mhm.
of, standards that we have to follow
Yeah.
too, and we get admonished too. And there's a rule book just for our professional conduct, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that it's just about making sure that everybody's on the same level playing
Mhm.
field, and no one should feel above or superior than one person, right? And
Right.
every joke, as they say, has a little bit of truth to it, right? So
Mhm.
taking all of that into consideration and just holding people really accountable
Yeah,
for
they
the
should.
duties and obligations that they signed up for.
Absolutely. By the way, speaking of the rules of professional conduct, did you hear the judge read those right out to the attorneys today?
He did. And
Yep.
it really it does two things. Number one, it tells you the flavor of this judge, right?
Mhm.
He is very soft spoken. You know, he didn't have to raise his voice, he didn't have to be stern, but you could read between the lines what he meant. So that was the first reason why I think he read that. But number two, it was a reminder that this is still a court of law, right? You know, we still have to get to a finish line at some point. In order to get to the finish line, we have rules to get to the finish line.
Yeah.
So let's keep that in mind, everybody. You know, this
Yeah.
Karen Reed, it's no surprise that this is, you know, a public case. Every case that Karen Reed will ever touch will be a public case, right? But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, we still have a court of law. We still have rules. We still have to
Mhm.
follow those rules. So he was definitely putting it direct to the attorneys and just
Yeah.
reminding that. But besides everything that's in the media, we still have rules here. Everyone follow the rules here.
Oh, yeah. I agree. Now, back to those offensive texts. You are a criminal defense attorney. You've been practicing for what, 12 years or
Yeah,
more?
going on, yeah, I think going on like 14, 15 years.
14, 15 years. Okay. Well, so after this, will you be changing your strategy at all? And what I mean by that is, will you, if you believe a police officer who has investigated one of your clients holds similar beliefs to Michael Proctor or Sean Good, will you try to subpoena their personal phone records? How would you go about that?
Yeah, you know, that's actually a really interesting question because I've tried cases and you know, I've had to unfortunately put some officers in the hot seat because sometimes you can read, you know, you're reading the police report, you're trying to imagine how the facts are laid out, and you kind of think to yourself, something doesn't really add up, something really doesn't make sense, but maybe the rest of your case is strong enough that you don't even have to dig into that, or sometimes your case is weak enough and you don't really know where to start. But yes, absolutely, my eyes are even more wide open, my ears even more perked up to think about, well, you know, if I'm feeling, you know, a certain way about how these facts came to be, maybe there is something else that I'm missing, maybe there is, you know, some background noise that, you know, isn't part of this. And I think the other thing is too, we only see Proctor and Good, right? But there
Yeah.
will be a number of other people who are gonna, trust me, be put on this list. So it may just make my job easier because the
Yeah.
list will already be ready right there. But you know, I think it does. I think any good defense attorney is going to start thinking like, okay, you know, it just calls to mind, you know, for example, one of the messages where Proctor essentially says that he's not going to rush to the scene because,
Yeah. Oh.
you know, there's a black person there. And
Oh.
it's like, okay, so there goes tampering with evidence. There
Mhm.
goes, you know, a list of kind of like violations, and you're like, huh, I wonder, you know, in such and such case if that's what happens here. But you know, it makes you think and question if a timeline doesn't make sense. Why is that? You know, maybe if there's multiple police reports from multiple angles, you gotta have to start thinking about these a little bit differently now.
Absolutely. And I wonder if that was so awful. So, I wonder if anybody's figured out, "Oh, I was in that crash. How fast did the ambulance come?"
I know. Can you imagine if that was, you're thinking
Oh.
back years, like, wait a second, I remember this. Or imagine if you were like the EMT on that case, or if you were just like a bystander thinking, like, wow, it's taking the police to get here so long, and here's your answer, like right front and center, and you're feeling that gut feeling down there, and you're just like, I can't believe that this was the reason.
Oh, I know. And another thing I want to bring up too that I've been thinking about is not only for criminal defendants, but Proctor talks about attacking his girlfriend while she's asleep.
Mhm.
So R and SA, I can't even say those words on YouTube. They need, that he needed to roofie somebody. So
Yeah.
it also, in my
Yeah.
opinion, speaks to victims of crime as well. Like, how seriously would he take a victim's version of events?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it goes back to what I was saying before. We're only seeing a snapshot of these messages. There could have been others. What if there are other like damning pieces of information where, God forbid, knock on wood, there was an actual, assault. Like, we don't even know. But just to see that this is the thought process of this individual and that this is the mentality of this individual, it's more than just hard to read and hard to believe. It's just infallible. Like, how could this, person exist? And I even saw somebody mention the fact that he should immediately go under a psych evaluation because
He's probably in one.
he's probably in one right now, right? That's probably where he is right now because it's so hard to think, who would think like that? Who thinks like that? Okay, it's not even, it's two-part. Who thinks like that? And then who writes out their thoughts like that? It's like, you can think that way, I guess, but to take those thoughts from your mind and then put them in writing to another human being.
I can't imagine, I can't imagine. I don't know anybody, I know some vile people, but I don't know anybody that is this bad. But maybe I'm just naive. I must be.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's what this experience is telling us. Are we all naive? Are we that naive to think that this is so incredible to believe? But maybe this is a wake-up call that we're all naive, right? Maybe there are more people among us that have this thought process that we never thought about. I don't know. I mean, like I said, for me, the words, you could tell they just came out so easy, so easy. And it was, there wasn't any breaks to stop. It was just a normal set of conversations that were just happening. And we just happened to be the receivers of those, messages. But it just came out super fluid.
I just got I have to put the glasses on to read these remarks, but that was funny. Margaret, did you just say poor Ellen Jackson? Well, no, I said it sarcastically. Poor Ellen Jackson
is living his best life. He's flying in, flying out.
No, I definitely said that sarcastically, but going back to what we were just talking about a little bit, I have these ideas, they kind of go in my ear, then they go out, then they come back. So do you believe women, going back to the whole conversations I was talking about with victims of crime, do you think women are sometimes treated differently by law enforcement, either as suspects, victims, witnesses, or even professionals like lawyers? What's your thought on that? I'm putting you on the spot.
No, I can live that first-hand knowledge that I definitely believe that women are treated differently. Even taking myself into consideration, I still get confused with whether or not I'm the interpreter on the case, and I could be in a whole suit. Okay, I get confused on whether or not I'm the defendant, and I've been practicing almost 15 years. I mean,
come on, they see you enough on TV. They can't
think that I would be handing out autographs right now, not my bar card to prove I'm a lawyer, right? So yes, I've had cases, and this even happened in the short time when, there was, defense attorneys not taking cases. There were a lot of victims who just would jump up and down and just try to protect themselves, and they were not being heard. And it's even not even so much that they weren't being heard. It's what they were conveying wasn't being received, right? How many times do we hear cases where victims just choose not to come forward for years because they feel like someone's not going to believe me, or they're not going to believe my version, or they're going to ask me, why did I wait so long? Or how come I didn't take pictures of my injuries? And it's like, they're victims. They're not when they're in the moment, these are not things that are coming across their forefront, right? They're just thinking about how to live, how to survive this event, right? And now you have,
and so how it's Yeah, and how would somebody like Proctor treat
Yeah,
what if it was a situation where, you're living with somebody, it's a girlfriend, boyfriend, or even husband and wife situation.
right.
They might not take it seriously.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, unfortunately, a lot of times you have cases where, um, these victims in these cases will come forward and they'll just say, I've chosen not to pursue this case. I've chosen not to testify. Sometimes you even hear, I've heard, different situations where not that they're coached, but they're kind of being told, like, if you let this go away, your divorce will go better, or whatever the case may be, right? So they get these ideas in their head. And imagine if they're getting it from the police. I would not be, I'm not saying for sure, I absolutely don't know, but having these messages in the forefront now make you kind of wonder about some of these situations and whether or not these victims feel like they can really come forward, and this trust that is being
Mm,
broken down, for, again, people who are public servants who are here to
yeah.
serve and protect. And you see messages like this there. How does someone feel comfortable, expressing themselves when there are jokes kind of going around like that? It's
Oh, I
hard.
know. Oh, it is
It's
hard.
really
And
hard.
so here's a question, which is actually a really good question. Um, that's Morgietta, who's the guest. Oh, is there any chance that Proctor might eventually down the road go to jail for any of this? That's a really good question. I'm gonna have you
So
take that one.
I feel like there's so many layers to the Proctor. We'll call it the Proctor fiasco, because at this point it's not just one case. I think it's so many moving cases. I think the biggest thing right now is these civil cases are going to uncover really police misconduct, but more so that it's the strategic tampering of evidence in criminal cases. I think that's what the civil cases on the criminal side are going to expose. Like, for example, why did they use red Solo cups to collect evidence at the
That's all they
Kennedy
had.
case, right? Or, again, Proctor saying that he's not rushing to the scene, or even there was even a message where he said he was going to plant evidence
Yeah,
on a
plant cocaine.
defendant. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was going to plant cocaine evidence against this person. So those issues, once they start boiling together and being brought together, I could see, them reopening the federal investigation again into his conduct, but not only his conduct, his strategic tampering of criminal evidence. That is a crime, right? Obstruction of justice is
Mm-hmm.
a crime, and that you can be charged with, and that you can go to jail for. Yes. So
Yes.
I think it's bubbling over into a very large obstruction of justice charge that I wouldn't be surprised if the DOJ, Department of Justice, or some other larger entity doesn't really, swoop in and try to, bring these charges. And it may not happen now, right? It could
Right.
happen a few years from now. You could take any high profile federal case. It takes the feds years, right, to build their cases, because once they build that case, it's going to be pretty close to airtight, right?
Oh,
But what
yeah.
these civil cases are doing is unraveling that obstruction of justice, against Michael Proctor, Sean Good, and anybody else who really is getting, tied into this fiasco.
I agree. And do you think defense attorneys should be revisiting prior cases involving these investigators?
Oh,
Like,
they will.
yeah.
They will. If they already started,
Yeah.
they will. I mean, this is, I don't want to make
Yeah.
them synonymous in any ways, because we're talking really apples and oranges. The first thing that I thought of was the Annie Dukin cases. Remember that, when
Yeah.
the chemist,
The
and
lab.
the lab, and I mean, we were talking hundreds of cases that just got reopened, because of this one individual. And courts will never leave, fortunately, in our jurisprudence, even though it doesn't always come out that way. But if there is an injustice that has been had, and there's an opportunity to reverse that injustice, the courts will definitely take a second look. And like I said, it is apples and oranges, but what I think about is the Annie Dukin cases, how it was one little string that unraveled all these other cases. Then I will be very surprised if we don't start seeing a litany of cases being reopened where Proctor was the lead investigator, whether it was uh, uh, minority, whether it was a woman, whether it
Yeah.
was someone who was of Jewish descent, if somebody who identified as LGBTQ2. I mean, all of those cases, if I was that attorney or if I was sitting in jail, I would definitely want somebody to revisit and say, hey, Proctor was the lead investigator in this case. Do you mind taking a second look? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and now there's also the case where Boston police officer Nicholas O'Malley was recently indicted and arrested for voluntary manslaughter. So, prosecutors allege that body cam footage shows O'Malley shot Stevenson King multiple times as he was leaving the scene of a carjacking. And then the officer claims he was acting in self-defense to protect his partner. Now, what are your thoughts on, do you see any parallels between that set of circumstances and the behavior exhibited by Proctor and Good? What do you think? Because we've
So
talked about that case, you
we
and me.
did. I want to actually bring up one point about body worn camera because body worn camera didn't always exist, right? Body worn camera came as a result of change after years and years of scrutiny of police officers. So just kind of tying that back into what's this whole thing with Karen Reed and what can she effectuate? It could be something similar to that, but I'm going to put that to the side for a second. I think the O'Malley case for right now, because obviously we're in the very early stages of the case. For right now, I think it's too premature to create a parallel between the two of them, because we are talking about quite literally split second decisions, right? Obviously, no one except for the attorneys really, and obviously O'Malley have seen the body worn camera. Obviously, he lived through that. His partners who were there lived through that. The attorneys have seen the body worn camera. But from what I can suspect, we're talking about split seconds where a decision was made, and obviously now that case is being tried. O'Malley was working. He was in full uniform, and there was a precipient call to this particular incident, right? So there was a call that a woman, her vehicle was carjacked, and they were actively pursuing this alleged carjacker, right? So I think it's a little bit different. And I think, and I'm not sure, so don't quote me, I think at that particular time, they may or may have not known that Stephen King had a record. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But I still think that's a little bit different than what Proctor and Good's conversation is for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're having a regular conversation. This is not in the line of duty. They weren't like at their work desk. They were just having these casual conversations amongst themselves. And these are thoughts that are kind of going through their mind every day,
Right.
whereas the O'Malley case, he may have had, and I don't know, he may or may not have had some preconceived notion going into this event. I don't think he knew Stephen King. I don't think he knew really the circumstances. He's getting a radio call to go to an event, a crisis situation, and he's trying to make a split decision. So I think it's a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
than what we're seeing here in the Proctor and Good situation.
But if you're a defense attorney, well, if you're the prosecutor in that case, I'm just thinking, or if there's ultimately some sort of wrongful death civil suit, which is usually after the criminal trial, do you think you'd try to see if there's anything in the background or personal cell phones on, O'Malley's personal cell phone? Do you think you
Well,
could?
I think again, just as a result of the Procter and Good situation, and again, obviously we have O'Malley's defense team and the prosecutors on this case are extremely well versed. So I can already see that because of this culture of these text messages coming out, somebody is going to at least try to confiscate his phone or try to create that culture. I think the prosecution is going to try to paint this picture that they came into this crisis situation with a bias, pretty much based on the location, based upon the fact that Stephen King was already Black, based upon the fact that he was allegedly a known criminal. He has this record. So, they're going to bring in these biases and try to color the fact that these officers went in with this intention that, they shouldn't have, right? How
Right.
far it will go, I don't know. Again, remember the messages that we're seeing now in the Proctor conversation came from a FBI investigation, right? It wasn't,
Yeah.
and then it was subpoenaed through Rosemary Scabaccio and her
Yeah.
team for her case.
Yep.
So to the extent that the state and Commonwealth of Massachusetts will subpoena O'Malley's personal phone for their case, I don't know. I mean, now they may try to make an argument. I think his defense team is going to say it's not relevant. I think they would have to find some other showing. Maybe he had Facebook posts or Instagram posts where it would lead to them try to subpoena his cell phone and his messages. But I think they need to have a greater connection before they just start subpoenaing his phone. But
Yeah.
again, I won't be surprised if it doesn't start happening more frequently, because again, we're talking about a
Yeah.
culture now, right? We're talking about regular and systemic, issues happening, allegedly in the police department, which is going to continue to come more to light.
Oh, exactly. I think listeners might be interested in, and I'm going to ask you this, as a defense attorney, how would you go about making that showing in order to get somebody's cell phone records? And let's say you have a criminal defendant and you have an inkling that the lead officer who arrested your client, let's say your client was a gay person, and you have you heard through the grapevine that that particular officer was anti-gay. What would you need for a showing in order to get cell phone records like that?
Yeah, there's actually a really frequently used case. It's called Commonwealth v. Long, where essentially the essence of that case is it gives a defense attorney the right to do further investigation and have a hearing on whether or not the actions of the officer in their particular case were racially motivated or motivated in any particular way outside of their police duty. So a lot of the defense attorneys, especially if, Roxbury, Dorchester, these are popular areas where, you could say statistically, these individuals are arrested more likely than other counterparts. A lot of defense attorneys use what's called a long motion to pierce into whether or not the activities of the police officer in that particular case were biased against their clients simply because of XYZ ABC. And it goes back to what I was explaining before about getting the statistical analysis of arrests in that area or convictions in that area. So Commonwealth v. Long is a tool that defense attorneys use today in Massachusetts in order to pierce that, bubble of whether or not there was police misconduct involving the arrest of their client.
Oh, thank you. That's very informative. Now, what reforms would you like to see emerge from the whole situation that we're looking at now with the texts?
I think, and it's not even so much what I would see. I think it just may just happen. We're going to see a lot more transparency in the way of, police culture. I think we're going to see a lot more accountability. I think the difficult part in this particular case is, the other side to that coin is, this blue wall that people talk about where officers kind of stick behind each other and stick together, and it's kind of like a us versus them scenario. But what I suspect won't happen is people are not going to drag other people down. Like I'm not going to go down in flames with you as easily as it happened before. So I think what we're going to see is definitely a lot more transparency, definitely a lot more training. I
Yeah.
think that's definitely something that's going to come out of this. I think we're going to see a lot more apologies, public apologies. I think,
Yeah. We're going to see those
Matthew
every
Police,
day.
Canton State Police were right on top of that, and said, hey, we denounced this. But I think we'll see, what comes from this. I hope that it happens sooner rather than later, right?
Hmm.
Because unfortunately, I'll go out on a limb and say that this is an ongoing issue across the board. We don't know where, we don't know when, but it's not an isolated Procter and Good situation. So hopefully sooner rather than later, we will start to see some change.
I hope so. I really do. And I do feel for all the good police officers out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to believe the good outweigh the bad. Me.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, we need police, right? We
Hmm.
are not a society that unfortunately can police ourselves
No.
yet, right? We're not in the position to do that. So we need, for a lack of better words, law and order, right? So we need that as a
Yeah.
society. And I think that it's troubling that we have to get to this point at this level, but it will hopefully bring out more of the good and more of the people who will say, yeah, I don't stand by that. Or in your example, when the person that you knew signed up and made a joke that they were terminated very quickly, that the breakdown of this culture happens sooner rather than later, I think
Yeah.
is the mission, right? I think that's what
Yeah.
it's all about.
And so it is probably happening on different levels like I saw. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
and
So,
people have to be careful and people have to change their general attitudes about other people as well.
absolutely. I mean, it's 2026, right? At
Yeah.
some point, we have to cohesively coexist better as a society, right? Because we have so many other things we have to deal with and worry about, that the human nature of dealing with people really shouldn't be the number one top battle that we're dealing with every day. We have other battles to be dealing with, right? Especially not with people that we hold accountable in these types of positions.
Right. Well said. Well, Morgietta, I really appreciate you being on here with me.
Yeah,
Thank you so
absolutely. Of
much.
course. Didn't even
And
notice the time go
I,
by.
I don't I can't see the time without my glasses. So I'd have to put them on and I don't have my watch, so I have no idea.
It
But
looks like it's been about 47 minutes.
well,
That
perfect.
Yeah, I
That's
know. It's really good.
that's perfect. I knew you'd be a fabulous guest and I look
Thank you.
forward to seeing you on Canton Confidential, if not before that.
Absolutely.
And good luck with all your work out there and your trials.
Thank you,
If I
thank
get in
you, thank
trouble, I
you.
know who I'm gonna call.
I
I mean
appreciate
it.
that.
So, well, thank you, and I'm gonna go ahead and and you know what? Thank you, but also thank you for all the listeners out there and for all of you who also listen to the show after it goes from being live to just being on YouTube and the various channels. So I appreciate all the comments and I do try to answer them all over the week. And please subscribe. I'm not a huge channel yet, but I'm growing. And have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much for watching The Margaret McLean Show.